return. And it all starts out in the desert. And the desert is a very dangerous place. The wind blows the sand around, so you have no landmarks. There's very little water in the desert, so no food can grow and there's nothing to drink. Because the wind blows the sand around, it can sting your skin, so people wear a lot of clothes in the desert, even have their faces covered. A lot of wonderful things happen in the desert. But nobody goes into the desert unless they absolutely have to. Now this is Jerusalem. And here's a wall. Inside the wall is the temple. The temple was built for God, and the people knew that God was in the temple, but they thought it was the only place that you could pray to God. People thought this wall would protect them from everything. Then came the Assyrians. They attacked the city, but it was a terrible time. People fought and some starved to death. Finally, the Assyrians went away, and the Babylonians came. They did not go away. Their king wanted the city for himself, so they broke through the walls and burned the temple. Then they took the people away. Soldiers marched God's people from Jerusalem. They looked back at the smoke. They took everybody away, and only a few people were left in the land. They knew they would never see it again, and as they walked through the desert, they had to get up when the soldiers said. They had to go to sleep when the soldiers said. They got wearied and some of them died. It took a long time. Then they were in exile. They could not go home. They hung their harps on the weeping willow trees and sang sad songs. They dreamed of Jerusalem and the temple, but they were told they could not go back. They even faced towards Jerusalem when they said their prayers. Slowly, God's people began to understand that God was in this place too. And God's presence came to them as they gathered to read the scriptures, to tell stories, and to pray. The king of Babylon allowed many of God's people to work. They set up little stores, and some even worked for the king. It was a shock when the king of Persia came with his army and took Babylon for himself. The new king began to let some of the people go back. to Jerusalem, go back to Jerusalem. They went with Ezra. They began to rebuild the temple. More were allowed to go back, and they went with Nehemiah and rebuilt the walls around the city. Some of the people, then the people were no longer in exile. They could go home again. But you know what happened? Not all the people went home. Now they know that God was in this strange and foreign land. Some of them stayed because God was there too. Now, I wonder what part of the story you liked best. I wonder what part of the story was important. I wonder what part of the story was about you or where you were in the story. I wonder if there's any part of the story that we can leave out and still have all the story we need. Okay, this was The Exile and the Return.